Let's move on to my session, which is going to talk about 5 predictions for 2025 associated with technical recruiting and specifically this community. Now, I have to say that when I signed up for this conference and this particular speech about 3 or 4 months ago with Lindy, I didn't know that the rate of change was going to be daily. And so the idea of predicting anything is pretty problematic. But I'm going to give you 5 trends that I think that are pretty compelling. I'm going to give you the data points that speak to those particular trends. Oh. Sorry. The first trend is AI really does become the next big thing. Now, in the aftermath of Chris's briefing and how pervasive it's being used already in society, and probably the amount of recruiting that everybody in this room is doing that involves AI skills, this might be obvious, but I have to say that as a public company CEO, I talk to about 50 to 100 investors each quarter, and you'd be surprised at the number of investors that ask the open question, is AI a flash in the pan? Is it Web 3.0? Is it blockchain? Is it crypto? Or is it real? And so I'm going to speak to some of the statistics that I think really do point to the fact that it is a real trend today and into the future. The first thing that you should understand is that if you looked back at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data associated with the technical category, which was established around the year 2000, you'd find that the number of technical workers in the United States has grown roughly with the rate of GDP growth, which is around 2.5% historically. Now, very importantly, that's the past, so let's talk about the future. The graphic on the left is a CompTIA study that was done last year, CompTIA being a very important industry association for the tech workforce, that indicates that they believe that the tech workforce is going to grow by 18% from 2024 to 2034. So 18% is a pretty good amount of growth over the course of those 10 years. More importantly, if you dive down into the study deeper, it says that the amount of data scientists and data analysts will be 304% more growth than the average worker growth in the United States. So the #1 growth vehicle associated with tech as an occupational category is data science, data analytics, i.e. artificial intelligence. And here is another very important takeaway that comes directly from our DICE salary survey and our DICE salary report. The DICE salary report was released on the 7th of January of this year. It pertains to data that we collected last year. And ClearanceJobs salary report was released this morning. So you can find it online right now. But an important takeaway about that report, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit further, is that the headline was that salaries for technology workers in the United States grew approximately 1.1% from 2023 to 2024. However, that's the average of all tech workers. But tech workers that had natural language processing as a skill set, which is obviously an AI-related skill set, actually grew their compensation, their salaries, by 21%. And I always say that the way that the United States compensation market works is supply and demand. If you don't have enough supply and there is a very strong demand, you have to pay up for talent. And that's what's happening right now for AI-related skill sets. Another interesting data point is the job postings on DICE as a platform itself. At the beginning of last year, so 2024, in January, about 9% of our job postings had AI-related skills as requirements. By the end of the year, that figure became 30%. So we're seeing the demand explode on the DICE website itself. And in fact, if you go to DICE any particular day, we have about 150,000 tech jobs. So it's a pretty robust data set. Another very good indication is the use of consultants to essentially engage in AI-related projects. And here's a very important quote that came out of the 4th quarter earnings conference call for IBM. IBM, by the end of last year, had booked $5 billion of AI-related project work. But more importantly, it booked an incremental $2 billion of that $5 billion in the fourth quarter. So the amount of project work that is being done by IBM and these other consultants is actually accelerating. The other thing that we see as a signal is we have a feed called Lightcast. And Lightcast scrapes all these jobs off of career websites across the United States. And so it tells us who the largest tech hiring firms are in the United States. Last year, the largest tech hiring firms in the United States were Accenture, Deloitte, IBM, McKinsey, all these consulting firms that are essentially hiring armies of AI professionals. Now, what's going on behind the scenes? What's going on behind the scenes is that when a big tectonic change happens in the overall economy, it's the large firms that can afford to hire McKinseys and IBMs to essentially engage them to figure out what the use case is. I believe that this is the front end of that wave of AI adoption, and it's playing out with these consultants right now. So let's go to my second prediction, which I think is a little bit more controversial. And that prediction is the dam breaks for candidate movement. And I'll explain what that means. Effectively, this is the results that Gallup just released associated with their 2024 survey of all the trends across their Q12 instrument. And if you're not familiar with Q12, it's used by literally thousands of companies, including DHI. It asks 12 questions about employee sentiment. It's a survey that's really geared towards understanding employee engagement in that particular company's context. So they aggregate all of the survey results, and it's pretty surprising that the bottom line is that 51% of all employees are actively seeking a new job or watching for a new job, and the amount of satisfaction with their job currently has dropped precipitously. Now, if you think about it, we in the tech community called 2022 the year of the Great Resignation. We called 23 and 24 the year of the Great Stay. What Gallup is proposing is that 2025 should be called the year of Great Detachment. And that's what they're seeing, at least in their statistics. Now, there are a lot of different causal factors that they claim are the reasons for this detachment. And I'd like to go through a few of these just in terms of the statistics because I think they're interesting. The number one is rapid organizational change. 73%, think about that, almost 3/4 of the people that were surveyed by Gallup last year said that their organization has experienced some level of disruptive change in the past year. Number two, hybrid and remote growing pains, and specifically the challenges to communication and coordination that involves. Number three, new customer experiences. Post the pandemic, the respondents said, or 71% of them said, their customers became more demanding in every respect. Number four, new employee expectations. There appears to be a mismatch between what employees expect and what employers can offer in terms of work-life balance. And then number five, broken performance management practices. Very little confidence in the performance management systems. Performance is much more difficult if you're working remotely or in a hybrid environment. So these are the reasons that Gallup gives for this great detachment. And these surveys are across all industries, all sectors of the economy. It's not just tech workers, but I'm gonna switch to tech workers next. This is a survey that came out of a company called Jellyfish, which actually looks at the state of engineering engagement and engineering management engagement. And the headline statistic is that last year, 65% of all respondents experienced burnout. Now, if you worked for a larger company, 500 or more employees, it's really interesting that 85% of managers said that they experienced burnout, and 92% of executives reported experiencing burnout. So burnout is pretty much part of the environment today. And I believe that's because we've been suppressing hiring. So if you suppress hiring and the workload remains the same, obviously people are working more over the course of time. Here's another interesting survey result. And I think this is kind of obvious, but I'm glad that somebody actually studied it and they surveyed individuals. This comes from the Harness 2024 State of Developer Experience Report, so it's specific to developers. But it says that 52% of developers cited burnout as a reason for their developer peers leaving their job. Now, I can tell you that we look at a whole bunch of different statistics across the developer environment, and I can tell you that we did have a great stay in 2023 and 2024, but the amount of voluntary attrition is now starting to pick up, specifically the second half of 2024. So this is really happening right now. Another statistic comes from the DICE salary survey itself. And this one is pretty daunting in my opinion, especially in terms of the growth of the percentage. But 47% of employed tech professionals are actively looking for a new job, up dramatically from 29% last year. And there was a consultant named BetterWorks that put together a report of their consulting work in 2024, and they said that 78% of top performers who use AI say they are actively looking for a new job. Think about that, 78%. Virtually all top performers that have AI skills are looking for a new job. That is, in my opinion, incredibly profound. The last statistic that I'll leave you with is one that comes from the folks over at Stack Overflow, and they do another developer report where they survey approximately on the order of 8,000 developers, so it's a pretty robust survey. And the question was whether or not you're satisfied at your current job, and 32% said not happy at work, 47.7% complacent at work, 20% happy at work. So 80% were either not happy or ambivalent about where they were working. This is 80% of the developer population, at least surveyed by Stack Overflow. So is the dam ready to break, as I indicated, as my prediction stated? I'm not sure, given that we live in a very uncertain environment, and when uncertainty pervades the environment, most people become much more conservative. But I can tell you that burnout is very relevant. People are not happy at work. They're ready to move. They're actively looking. Let's go to the next prediction, which is tech salaries grow with the inflation rate again. Now, this might sound pretty obvious, like you think about the fact that you have an expectation that your cost of living adjustment should be associated with inflation, because that allows you to live the same quality of life that you had the previous year. But in the case of tech workers in the United States, we've barely been able to cover inflation rate over the last 20 years. So one of the things that we did this year for the DICE salary report, since it was our 20th year report issued, is we went back to the very first year and looked at the statistics associated with 2005. And you can see with this graphic, and it's probably hard to see because it's a black graphic, that the actual salary, average salary for tech workers is the blue line, and it goes steadily upward from the left to the right. The rate of inflation change is the red line, and it bounces around a lot. And as everybody experienced in 2022, you can see the big, huge jump in 2022. That was a lot of inflation. But probably more important is the idea that in 2005, the very first report, the average tech salary in the United States was $69,700. The average tech salary last year, 2024, was $112,521. However, if you adjust that original salary back in 2005 for inflation, it should have been $114,000 just to cover inflation that took place over the period. So you'd say that tech workers really aren't better off than they were 20 years ago in terms of their compensation rate. It's just covering inflation. Now, importantly, as I indicated earlier, last year, the average tech worker in the United States got a 1.2% salary raise. So obviously that did not cover the inflation that we saw last year, which was roughly about 3 to 4%. The good news for this particular group is that in the ClearanceJobs report that was issued this morning, the average change, the increase was 4% last year. But there are different mechanics and it's more complicated to talk about the cleared population than it is the overall tech population. Now, here's a couple of other statistics that come out of the DICE salary report that I think are pertinent to recruiting efforts. Almost 2/3 of DICE technology professionals believe that they are underpaid. And less than half, just 45%, actually received any kind of an increase in 2024. So I believe, as a net result of all these factors coming together, that we will see a bigger increase this year for the tech workforce. Again, it's uncertain times. There's a lot of conservatism in terms of the way that businesses are looking at the remainder of this year. But if we revert back to the mean, which is to say that we have to cover inflation for tech salaries, we should see a robust change in the average tech salary, again, across all positions, not just cleared positions, in the United States. My fourth prediction is that DOGE actually increases the demand for certain military contractors. And I think everybody's trying to understand what DOGE means to their particular business, to their category, to their industry real time. I think some of these actual quotes that came out literally within the last 30 days are very important for us to actually think about. The new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, should take steps to speed up the defense acquisition process and reduce barriers to foreign military sales, said the chief executive at General Atomics. Lockheed Martin's CEO called DOGE an opportunity to help streamline the DoD's acquisition process. L3Harris's CEO, Chris Kubasik, sent a letter to Musk laying out his ideas on how to reduce Pentagon bureaucracy, including by eliminating certain government accounting rules, as well as reducing regulations. Is anybody here interested in reducing the FAR? Then finally, a great quote from Alex Karp, who, if people don't know, is the CEO of Palantir. He said, "Disruption at the end of the day exposes things that aren't working. There'll be ups and downs. This is a revolution." So obviously, whenever there's dramatic change, there are winners and losers. So if you think about it, I think what will happen, or potentially could happen, is that those folks that are focused on automation, efficiency, data-based decision-making are going to be the ultimate winners in any kind of a change that's induced by DOGE to the Department of Defense or the intelligence community. And in fact, you can see that the investors are certainly betting on that. If you look at the red line, that is Palantir and the increase in their market capitalization. They are the most valuable US defense company right now in the environment. And they've shot upward dramatically 2024 and 2025. Obviously, they are benefiting from the revolution. Again, I think the real underlying, kind of change that's taking place is that DOGE is focused on cutting costs, but it's also at its heart focused on efficiency. And those firms that are focused on efficiency and automation could be the winners. This is an important point made by the CEO of Booz Allen recently, and he states, "If the government wants to operate with fewer people, it will need to operate with more technology, and technology that works. And our stuff works, and it works beyond the prototype." So I think, to summarize this particular prediction, there have been a multitude of studies that have indicated that the procurement system for the United States in terms of the Defense Department is broken. There was a great study that was just issued, not a study, it was an article in Foreign Affairs that was written by General Mark Milley, as well as Eric Schmidt, who was the previous CEO of Google, and they basically said, their final quote, the Pentagon needs a systemic overhaul in how it fights, what it buys, and how it does its shopping. And this could be what we see in the near-term future. My final prediction is that elevated European defense actually helps US military contractors and helps them a lot. So one of the important things to understand is that that military spending is a growth business. There's no question about it. In fact, the statistic that I pulled up is that in 2023, global military expenditures soared to $2.4 trillion. Now, the United States budget, as everybody probably knows in here, is roughly about $800 million of that. But in 2023, total spending on military procurement across the globe was $2.4 trillion. And it was a 6.8% increase from the previous year. And that was the fastest increase since 2009. And so I pulled out this quote from these particular analysts from a Belgian-based firm, a think tank, and they indicate that it would cost around 250 billion euros annually to essentially reset European defense spending from about 2% of GDP across the EU to 3.5%. Now you might say, well, that's probably because Trump is trying to get them to hit some kind of a percentage target of GDP. But actually the study was really interesting. It looked into what does it take to replace America's influence in the EU? And the answer is you would have to essentially replace 300,000 US troops, 1,400 tanks, 2,000 infantry vehicles, and 700 artillery pieces. The study concludes this is more combat power than currently exists in the French, German, Italian, and British land forces combined. So that's pretty profound, in my opinion. Now, you might say, hey, what does this, this Belgian-based firm really know about expenditures? Well, Bloomberg did an equivalent study that came out with almost the exact same amount of expenditures. They indicated that in order to essentially replace the United States capability in Europe, it would require $3.1 trillion worth of expenditures over the next 10 years. Now, I think the bottom line, the punchline for this prediction is that the EU has a pretty big problem. The problem is that 80% of their procurement is outside of the EU, and specifically 63% of their expenditures for defense is with United States firms. And what's profound about that is when I digged into that further, the United States accounted for 43% of global weapons exports over the past 5 years, and that's up from 35% 5 years ago. So think about that. The United States represents about 5% of the global population, and yet we're responsible for 43% of all military exports around the world. So my hypothesis is that if the EU has to replace all of that US firepower, military support, the US military establishment, the contractors, are going to be the beneficiaries of that spend in the years to come. And so with that, I wanted to leave myself a little bit of time, maybe a couple minutes, for Q&A, if that's all right, Lindy, unless I'm off track.
No, it's not, Art, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I love you
You're in
deeply,
charge.
but you're going to have to ask him all your questions at the break. I mean, it's not
Questions
like
at the break. I'm more than happy.
It's not like he's the CEO, but the show must go on. And
I know who I work for.
And David Cattler's on the line. I'm not going to keep him waiting, but we will take questions. Art is around all day. He's amazing. He's very great to talk to. So you can talk to him at the break. Sorry, Art. I love you. With that, we did have, again, if you haven't noticed.